morning. It is Monday, November 30th, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, amidst heightened security and what can only be described as a test to humanity, world leaders converge in Paris for an international summit to counter climate change. The Israeli Defense Forces close a third Palestinian radio station, citing incitement to violence as the reason. That in an attempt to combat a 2-month-long wave of stabbings and attacks. And later on the show, today marks the Jewish exodus from Arab and Muslim countries. We're going to take a closer look. Good morning, I'm Yael Lavie, and we begin in Paris today, where world leaders are gathering for the UN climate change summits. Hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world, as those leaders were gathering, took to the streets to demand action towards curbing hazardous emissions. In Paris itself, for example, activists laid out more than 20,000 pairs of shoes in the Place de la République to symbolize absent marchers after the government banned large protests in wake of the terror attacks there earlier this month. 100 people were arrested in clashes with police who fired tear gas to disperse the protesters. Hopes are high that the Paris summit will not fail like the previous such meeting 6 years ago in Copenhagen. But all sides say pledges made in Paris will be insufficient to limit a rise in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That is widely viewed as a threshold for a dangerous change in the planet's climate system. Now, the summit comes at a time when world leaders are more concerned with security and geopolitical diplomacy surrounding the Paris terror attacks and recent events in Syria. Will the participants remain on track and agree on common goals to save the planet, or will regional interests take over, as sadly they tend to? I'm joined in studio by Channel 1 Foreign Affairs editor Oren Nehari. Good morning.
Hello, good morning to you.
With us also environmental journalist, one of my favorite people, Netta Achitov. Good morning to you, of Haaretz newspaper. And also by government relations coordinator of Green Course, Elad Hochman. Good morning to you. Before anything else, let's take a look at the following report from Paris. Break it down.
The heat is on in Paris as COP21, the International Climate Change Conference, begins Sunday. World leaders attended the first day of the summit, which aims at reaching an agreement towards cutting greenhouse gas emissions. According to the initiator, this year the participants in the summit hope to achieve a legally binding and universal agreement on climate with the aim of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius.
I'm sure that we're going to have an agreement in Paris. That doesn't mean that everything has been resolved. There are quite a few issues that are still open and that are currently under negotiation. But I'm sure that we're going to have an agreement in Paris because every single country continues to increase its political will and its political determination.
It was also a good opportunity for protesters around the world, and specifically in France, to show their solidarity with the issue. Thousands of shoes were laid on the Place de la République square in Paris, replacing protesters who couldn't come following the cancellation of the march amid security threats. In a different area of the city, demonstrators form a human chain to protest the lack of government action.
We are not happy with our government's stance on renewable energy and our climate. We are here to say we want 100% renewable energy as soon as possible.
In light of new studies which show that 2015 is likely to be the warmest year on record, the issue of climate change seems more crucial and immediate than ever before. Ever since the Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1997, world powers are trying to find common ground towards cutting emissions. In recent months, several plans to reduce gas emissions were presented by the US and the EU. However, as world clock ticks, it seems that promises were left hanging in the air, which unfortunately remains quite polluted.
We're joined first from Paris. Let's go straight to Paris, where we're joined by I-24 News senior analyst Christian Mallard. Mr. Mallard, good morning to you. Let's first talk security. This is coming. Everybody was waiting for the summit. It's coming at a very bad time for Paris, isn't it?
Well, definitely. It just comes after this tragedy, these terrorist attacks, which happened 2 weeks ago, and which is still a shock for the whole country. So it's clear that all the head of states who have been arriving in Paris, like President Obama and others, like the Prime Minister of Canada, and everybody on Poroshenko, the Ukrainian, everybody went to the place where the tragedy happened a few weeks ago, and it's still a trauma for the whole country. So it's clear that the 2 points, the discussion will be, of course, climate change. to make sure that it's a success and not a failure as it has been in Copenhagen 6 years ago,
right.
And everything is on the table. But at the same time, we can see already the story between Russia and Turkey. The Turkish president trying to talk to Putin. He has tried to reach him on telephone the last few days, but was not successful since the Turkish brought down this Sukhoi, this Russian airplane recently. And definitely a lot of people say that how can we talk to Mr. Erdogan when we know that this man is buying fuel, is buying oil from Daesh, from the Islamic State, and have a certain number of members of the Daesh transiting between Syria and Turkey. How can we trust him? So there will be definitely underground discussions behind what is supposed to be the climate change summit.
Which exactly goes to the point of it's such an important climate summit, and sadly there are so many other things to deal with when all those leaders are there. Mr. Millard, I want to thank you. Or Nehari of Israeli Channel One, I want to start with you. The world's governments have already committed to curbing human activities such as burning fossil fuels, etc. They've done this, but that is not enough. 195 countries converge there. Can they agree on one thing when it comes to the climate when we know there are so many other things on the table?
Of course not.
Oh, great.
First of all, they cannot agree because each one has different interests in mind. And of course, there is the South versus the North, etc. Now, you talked about the regional differences, and they are there. And sadly, instead of the climate change, there's always two things, the urgent and the important. And because of the urgent stuff, like Turkey, Russia, we never arrive to the important stuff, which is the climate change. But it's not only that. It's the economy, stupid, as Bill Clinton said. And the big industrial countries, they face unemployment, and they face zero inflation, and they face economic crisis, and the workers or the unemployed are voting, and the oxygen is not. So again, in every country, they have their own interests, and the developing countries, what used to be the underdeveloped, and in many places it still is, but it's not politically correct to say it, they need to bring the tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions, out of poverty, which is extremely important as well. And how can they do it if not by industrialization, etc., etc. So, and globalization and trade pacts and what have you. So all those things are in the way of climate change and vice versa.
I want to understand, though, how urgent this is, and for that is Neta Achitov, Haaretz, both editor and environmentalist journalist, because this is urgent.
Yes.
Supposedly 2015 was the year that it has to be decided.
Yes.
How urgent and why?
First of all, I totally disagree. I think there will be an agreement, and for the first time it will be an international agreement. Figueres, we just saw her with the leaves. She said that on a dead planet there are no jobs at all. So we need to save the planet in order to make jobs. They all learned lessons from the 2009 Copenhagen, which was a disaster summit, really a disaster. But they did it the other way this time. First of all, the leaders are coming on the first day and not the last day, and then the delegations have 2 weeks to work on things that have already been working on for the past
year. But it will be
year.
Small, minuscule, and not enough.
No, it will be big. It will be big. Also, China and the United States already signed a huge agreement of reducing the emissions. This is something huge. The only country that is, on question mark is Brazil, the only country in the world. All the rest are totally into it. India just initiated this huge solar campaign with France. They're all really into it. The poor countries are in agreement for the first time in the human history with the rich countries on the goal, which is to 2% rise maximum from
and we're almost there, aren't
yes,
we?
We're almost there. It's really
Now, and I want to ask you, because you said just wait for it. I tend to be, and I'm sorry to say, I tend to be slightly less optimistic and side with Mr. Nehari here, because I'm thinking of all the things that are at play in that summit. If we're listening to that report that Putin and Erdogan are looking to meet on the side, nothing to do with climate change, everything to do with wars. Why do you think that in those 2 weeks, those world leaders can reach that agreement, or things that can lead us to some place that is not as dangerous as we are right now?
When the people will lead, the leaders will follow, and we see that. We see that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, voting with their legs, understanding that climate change is the one of the things that impact their lives on an everyday basis. Okay, we see the immigrants from Africa. We see third world countries that are suffering for that, and they need to change it. And clean tech and renewables, those are options today for the world, for poor people.
Those are options, but are they advanced enough? Are those options advanced enough to supply those solutions for countries?
This is the new diplomacy we're talking about. This is the new diplomacy. Everybody is around that. They reach agreements on other issues, through this climate diplomacy. This is what's going on today. This is like the future.
It's not a mistake that the U.S. and China are coming up into an agreement because they need to agree upon other economical things in their countries, as well as in Israel. We see that here. Thousands of people are coming up to fight their gas resource. To fight. We opened the climate march on Friday with 1,000 people in Haifa, in the Kinneret Lake, in Tel Aviv, and they are voting in their legs. They are voters.
And also the economists are joining in.
We are talking how many? 15,000 in a country of 7 million. You are talking about
those are the only people
about what in the last
streets.
weekend. Yesterday it was what? 250,000 around the world out of 7 billion. What I'm saying is I'm cynical. I'm more cynical than I am.
Advocate.
I'm playing devil's advocate. I think an agreement will be reached. I am not sure how much of it will be implemented. I don't see the United States Congress, especially if there is a Republican president after the next election. Those are climate denials, most of them, and they are not there for this fight. I see some sort of optimism coming out, and you mentioned it as well, from technology. I see it from clean tech. I see it from entrepreneurs in those fields, out of renewable, out of clean water, something that Israel excels in, etc. Those things can make a difference all around the world.
And to this gang, we can add the financial people, the economists. The Guardian is doing a huge campaign which they're interviewing many economists from the world. Thomas Piketty, one of the most famous, he wrote the book Capitalism. So he is, we are talking on this level. And he said that it's actually better it's really, it's better financially to invest in clean technology and to disinvest from coal, oil, and gas. So it's kind of a consensus among economists today also. So we have also this aspect in agreement with all the other.
But just quickly, to conclude, taking what Or Nahari just said, the implementation, how fast does it have to be, the implementation for the planet, I'm going to sound really dramatic right now, to survive?
It's not for the planet. It's for us, the
humanity.
So as fast as we can, and I think that Israel has the potential, and this is why we are fighting. This is why we are going to the streets. Israel has the potential eventually to come up with technological innovations and ideas, and we see that today. But it's always comes with a policy, and unfortunately today Israel's policy towards renewables and towards reduction of emissions is one of the worst maybe in the world. I think we're pointed in one of the last countries in the world to come up with to reduce emissions. We committed only on 17% of renewables until 2030. It's less than, I think, some of the world. Turkey.
To give you a year, 2020 was the goal, and now the new goal is 2050.
It's 2050.
Yes.
Oh, great. But lastly, Mr. Nahari, out of this summit, do we think that we're going to see anything other than climate change sign on the side?
We'll see declarations. That's what we see. We'll see declarations concerning terror, and we'll see declaration concerning migration, and perhaps that sort of stuff that we need to work together. And there is progress being made. There is progress being made in all those fields, but sadly not enough and not fast enough.
The question remains implementation.
It's our job, media and civilians, to force those declarations.
I'm loving the passion. We're going to look for it ourselves. Thank you all for being with me as we move along.